Thank you, Walter, for that really interesting presentation. I think that word "squeezed" it just resonated with me so much, and also another line from the presentation was just looking out for surprises. And I think it's funny how even how we've both prepared these presentations today and have come to very similar conclusions without actually collaborating much on what we were going to share today. But it shows that there's a movement building around this type of research, and that both an experience of myself and yours observing other PhDs is now starting to contribute to a dialogue about what does it mean to sort of cross these three lines, as Walter so wonderfully demarcated. So my name is Lauren. I'm from South Africa. In 2012 I started, I think I would say my PhD journey kind of started in 2012, but by mistake. I was standing on the side of a road in Burundi, and I'd just come over land from Rwanda, and I got out and I said, I just saw so much chaos. And to be honest, the thought in my mind, because I was just about finishing my master's program in sustainable development, and the thought that crossed my mind is, where do you even begin to do sustainable development in a place like this? And I was going to visit some friends in the capital city, and even though I'm African myself and come from a developing world context, I've never seen such poverty before and such frenziedness. And so that's where the PhD journey began, sort of August 2012. But I did not have any plans of doing a PhD. This was just a sort of a curiosity of, how does this work? And then, some months later, getting offered a PhD opportunity and thinking, okay, maybe I can use this PhD as a means of exploring these questions that I've had of how can a country as poor as Burundi produce some of the world's best coffee? What are the intersections between trade and development and social justice? So I just wanted to put that out there, that my research journey did not start in a formal way of me saying, I want to do a PhD. I was literally standing on the side of the road in East Africa, just curious. So the title of today's presentation is in your booklet, and I put it up there, but it's really also my ongoing research journey and my story in Burundi, and I want to tell you a story today. The story can sort of be summed up by three words: context, problems, and knowledge. And I'm also really aware of my own sort of context as I'm no longer in the academic world. I come from a social science background. Now I'm manager of a coffee company in Burundi, and I'm speaking to academics in a European context who are working in a field completely different to my own. So I think it's great that we just sort of put that on the table at the front, so that we know that we're not talking so much about content and academics, but we're talking about a way of doing research. And I hope that in sharing my story, there can be some interesting pull-out points for how you implement it into your own research story. So I'm going to talk first about context. Burundi's context, one of the poorest countries in the world, GNI per capita, just to put it into context there. A little bit about coffee production in Burundi. It used to be a colonial crop, as in most African countries. It was then controlled by the state, and then sort of the late 90s, the IMF and World Bank started putting a lot of pressure on Burundi to say, hey, you need to liberalize your coffee sector in order if you want to get some money from us. And so they said, all right, we're going to start liberalizing the coffee sector. That process still continues today because the state is really reluctant to let go of its control. And so this is the context into which my research journey is dropped into this idea of coffee can be this free market development tool for Burundi. Friends of mine started a coffee company called Long Miles Coffee Project. That's how I ever first heard about Burundi. That's how I knew that there was such a thing as called a washing station. So a washing station is where coffee is produced, it's pulped literally and transformed into a green bean for export. We started with 162 farmers in 2013, this last harvest season of 2018, we have 5,034 farmers, so growing quite rapidly. Main export markets are the US, roughly 55%, Europe, Australia, South Africa, and a little bit into Asia. Context of coffee production in Burundi. Not a pretty picture. And if you can imagine that coffee is the #1 foreign exchange earning crop in Burundi. So every year, imagine the budget of the country going like this. Arabica is naturally a cyclical crop, but because there's just been such a lack of investment into soil health and proper land use programs in Burundi, the cyclicity is just exasperated. So one year you're getting 29,000 tons green exportable, the next year 13,000 tons. Just now think about that from the perspective of a buyer who wants to buy from Burundi, and then they look at this graph and they say, no way, I can't guarantee my supply. Now the academic context. So I'm entering into this, I'm wading in, this is sort of early 2013, I'm wading in, I'm saying, okay, I want to explore what it means, this idea, I had a vague direction. I said, okay, what does it mean to do sustainable coffee in Burundi? So I'm wading into the academic literature and I'm confronted with what I call sticker coffee. So as I get into the literature, I realize I can't even begin to use the phrase sustainable coffee without talking about stickers. Fair trade, UTZ, you name it. And I'm confused because I've been living and working in Burundi for a while now at this point in the research journey, and I'm going, none of these stickers mean anything to the farmers we work with. And I know that looking through the requirements of what is needed to get one of these stickers in your coffee, there's no way, just capability-wise, that the majority of producers would even be able to afford getting into one of these programs, let alone the supply problem I just showed you earlier, the very low agroeconomic indicators. And then, because, as Walter so wonderfully delineated, you do need to remain legitimate. So I've entered now into a social context, but I need to speak to this other world of literature. So then I looked a bit further and I poked around. I think what I stumbled upon is a glaringly obvious fact that no one was talking about in the literature because no one had actually taken the stance of a producer. So this is a graph. It's a little bit outdated now, but I doubt it's changed much, showing what is produced as sustainable coffee and what is actually sold as sustainable coffee. So what that means is that every year you get a lot of coffee being produced, and we get excited about it. So this is great. More of the world's production is moving towards sustainably certified practices. What a great idea. Comes to the actual act of selling coffee, we see that really only about a quarter of it is being sold with that sticker on it so that the producers can capture the premiums. Now, there's a host of reasons why this is the case, and I won't get into it, but what I realized that I stumbled upon was this chronic oversupply that nobody in the literature was talking about, and everyone seemed very satisfied to keep, producing these figures on how many more producers and countries and origins were getting certified. So that's a little bit about the context that I was talking about. Now, some of the problems I had. So part of TD research, as you will know and will start to know the more you read the literature, is that you work with the societal actors to figure out what their problem is. That's, as Walter so nicely put it, that is your starting point of reality on a problem. How do societal actors see this problem? So when I started this process of just asking and saying, hey, what's your problem here in Burundi? What is the problem that Burundian producers face? And the organization into which I was embedded, Long Mouth's Coffee, threw a challenge out to me. They said, I want you to make farmers' problems roasters' problems, and roasters' problems farmers' problems. And I had no idea what that meant, but I did know from doing a bit of reading and from doing a lot of interviews with buyers in Europe that the market perception of Burundian coffee was not good. Some buyers, I would say buyers fell into two categories. Those who knew how excellent the quality was, but were completely frustrated with the logistics and the bureaucracy, the corruption of just simply getting the coffee out of the country. And then the other group of buyers knew how good the coffee was, knew about the problems, and still went after the coffee because it was indeed so good and had such a unique offering to the market. So, and then on the farmers' side, I spent quite a bit of time listening to farmers, focus groups, just really trying to understand what are the issues. I tried to simply show it there by that slide of the very volatile production. On the ground, that looks like farmers, one year getting a large harvest and the next year sometimes nothing. And coffee comes at a really important time in sort of this, in the calendar of Burundi. The harvest is March through to June. So then you get paid at the sort of mid-July, and then school starting in September. So money from coffee is really important. It literally puts kids in school. And farmers were facing this problem that they didn't have access to inputs. They had yields that were completely unpredictable, so they couldn't plan at all. And they had no means of market access. They had this crop that, because for lack of training, they can't taste themselves. They don't know how much it is in demand in the global market, but they just had zero access to it. My second problem, I needed to complete a PhD with all of the institutional stickiness that comes with and the regulations I'm jumping through. Third problem, I couldn't solve problem 1 in the usual way that problem 2 needs to be solved. And I just want to pause here for a moment. When I started my PhD, I asked myself 3 questions. What did I want to do? How do I want to do it? And why did I want to do it? And I felt if I was going to commit 4 years of my life to this process, the why of what I was doing needed to be very, very clear to me. And I sort of listed out 3 things that were my why for this PhD. I knew I wanted to be a value add to the organization within which I was placed by practically helping to solve a problem. I knew that I wanted to create 10 coffee-related jobs through my PhD. For me, the document was not sufficient enough. Like, I needed a minimum of 10 jobs to be created. And I knew that I wanted to learn by doing. And this is really important because my background is not in agriculture or rural development. I studied radio for my undergrad. I did a master's in urban studies with a focus on some sustainability issues. So I had, quite frankly, zero subject knowledge into an area in which I was just entering. So those 3 were my whys. I wanted to be a value add by problem solving, I wanted to create 10 jobs, and I wanted to learn by doing. And I think just as personally, sort of just, I'd like to say like it's really important. I think you guys are about 5 or 6 months into this research journey. I just really encourage you to know why you're doing this. And even though there's so much pressure to focus on what you're doing and how you're doing it, because those are things that you communicate with your academic institutions, like knowing your personal why is really important for the tough times, especially if you're like me, like an extrovert, and you're spending a lot of time alone in front of a computer and feeling very disconnected from the problem that you thought you were supposed to be solving whilst you're doing a very cerebral exercise. Knowing your personal why can really help you navigate some of the challenges and the squeezing that choosing a transdisciplinary methodology brings. Right, so remember my 3 problems. So I still, about 2 or 3 years into the research journey, still had those 3 problems. But what I did have, and what I leaned into, was at Stellenbosch University, there was a group of us, we started our masters, when was it, I started my masters in 2011. The first group that started working in this emergent transdisciplinary design was in 2009. So there was a group of us who had started exploring this in a local township just outside of Stellenbosch. And all I knew at the time was, as Walter said, there's not a lot of literature on this. All I knew is that I could sort of lean into the experiences of my classmates and my professors and what they were writing. It was a big problem actually, because at the time everything that was being written was not yet published, but we knew that it was working because I could see the fruits of it in my colleagues' research. So I leaned into methodology and I said, okay, this is what I've been taught. I've been taught that there's a way of doing transdisciplinary research within the developing world, and it relies on these 3 things. adductive logic, which is another way of saying that is the logic of hunches, which is quite simply just, so it's not deductive and it's not inductive. You're making connections between things that you intuitively sense and using that as a guide to move forward. Bricolage and acceptation. The best way, so Van Breda and Swilling summarize this really well in their article, and the best way that I can say it from their research is that you're not waiting for a perfect end scenario to emerge. You are working with the emergent potential of the present. So in a situation like myself, I am in one of the world's poorest countries. I am in a dynamic coffee startup that wants to produce an exceptional product for the Western world. I have to make farmers' problems, roasters' problems, and roasters' problems, farmers' problems. Working with that as opposed to saying, okay, I don't have a background in agricultural development. I don't know how to sell coffee. I need to go another 2 years to understand really the chemistry of the soil and the history of Burundi in order to have sufficient content knowledge in order that my voice is now valid. So are those two positions that I've sketched there clear? Is it clear what bricolage and acceptation means? Questions?
Acceptation, not really.
So yeah, sure. It's a funny word, and I often can't actually remember it myself. It means you're working with what the context offers you, and then allowing yourself to repurpose it to solve a problem. So if you have, so in this case, it was okay. I had this problem. I didn't have a team behind me who I could draw on, but I had one agronomist who we could work together to create a solution. As I said, Breda and Swilling explain this far better in their article, and I really strongly recommend you read it because there is a beautiful, there's a very beautiful and strong theoretical backing behind these terms. And the third one, allowing for emergence. This means things that you have never planned or thought for before, allowing them to shape and guide the research journey. Summing all these up is making the road as you walk it and designing the research process as it unfolds. How that looked in my context is that I did have to formally submit a research proposal in order to get into the system basically. I needed to exist within Stellenbosch University as a PhD student. I submitted a document. That document does not look anything like what I eventually produced. And I think I'm going to get to this a bit later, but the key to all of this is having a supervisor who understands you and having an institution that can allow for this sort of research, because if you don't, it's not going to work out. And yeah, so these were the hunches I was working off. I knew that what I was reading about in the literature was just, it just didn't apply to Burundi. But I had this sense that sustainable coffee had to be something that was completely rooted to context. That apart from context, we can't even talk about making coffee sustainable. The second hunch I had was that the producer in Burundi is not the individual smallholder farmer or the washing station, which produces and exports the coffee, but it's the relationship between the two. And this is quite an important sort of emergent thing that came up, is because on the one hand you have, so Burundi is filled with aid organizations and different development projects, and there's very little private sector activity. And all the aid organizations say that the producer in Burundi is a small-scale farmer who, on average, has about 80 coffee trees. This farmer with that size farm just simply cannot even produce a 60-kilogram bag to sell to anybody. And then on the other hand, it's really important for the private sector to realize that they're not the producer, even though they are the ones with capital, market access, and just, frankly, the ability to read French so that you can export coffee. Most farmers in Burundi can't read. So picking up on this thing, and it's still something that is quite difficult to contend for, because it doesn't fit into either categories. Because what are relationships built on? Trust. And Burundi, the history when it comes to coffee, there is the symbolic quality, that's branding. There's in-service quality, which is when you sit down in a cafe, how the baristas and the service staff make you feel. But material quality is what is the objective quality of the coffee. How, when we say, okay, it's at this altitude, it's processed in this way, it's been tasted in this way, we can use objective measures to come up with a material quality value. And material quality emerges as this boundary of it. It's like, wow, Burundi's got great quality coffee that is appreciated by both roasters and the international market. And if we work on this can actually improve some of the farmers' problems. So, in brief, what happened is I was sitting there in 2014 and I had this challenge. Okay, I need to write a PhD, I need to make farmers' problems roasters' problems, and roasters' problems farmers' problems. I, per chance, was in Rwanda meeting with Starbucks, has a farmer support center there. It's one of two in the world. There's one in Costa Rica and one in Rwanda. In a meeting there, I meet someone who has started an integrated pest management program, IPM, and it's called Coffee Scout Program. Without going into too much detail, this program employs young people in the communities, trains them in IPM techniques. IPM is low-tech, low-cost, and very high, very labor-intensive, so it's perfect for Burundi's context. And it basically uses techniques that improve the health of the plant by focusing on simple techniques that disconnect you from a reliance on fertilizer and external techniques. So we trained 6 people in 2014 on how to catch this bug called the intestia bug. So the intestia bug causes a flavor defect called the potato taste, which affects Burundian coffee, Rwandan coffee, and DR Congo coffee, and that affects the taste of the coffee, so it actually tastes like a raw potato. So we focused on this bug, a really tangible thing. We just trained people how to go and catch bugs. What started as just a way to sort of improve yields and to improve the quality of coffee turned into a much bigger learning experience. And in one of the sections of my PhD, I sort of divided into 2 things. One was the immediate impact, and one was the development impact. So the immediate impacts were quite amazing, given that really the amount of money that I had with my PhD statement and the fact that it was really just 2 of us training and working as, first year we trained 711 farmers. There were 15 full-time jobs created, so I was happy because my goal was to create 10 jobs, and already in year 1 we had 15 full-time jobs, 1 agronomist, 14 coffee scouts. We pruned 9,706 trees, 93 farms were mulched, we got rid of more than 1,000 intestia bugs, and then in the second year all that just blew up again. And all of that, what was interesting in this process is that all of that was not so interesting as what we were learning in terms of longer term developmental impact. So remember, I was working with this hunch that the producer is this relationship between farmers and the washing station, that any good relationship is built on trust. And what we saw is that we now had this connection to farmers, whereas before, if we wanted to get a message out, we had to sort of rely on, wait until Sunday and make an announcement in church, or tell some community leaders and hopefully the message goes out. Now we had these year-round connections to the communities, which I sort of termed as short, live community data feedback loops, because IPM is a year-long program, so it means the coffee scouts are working with farmers all year round. And it was funny because, after the harvest in 2014, when we started the pruning campaign in late July, August, and farmers said, "Why are you here? Harvest is over. You should be going home. All the other washing stations have finished their interactions with us." But no, now we're just preparing for the season. Another big one was creating non-seasonal agricultural jobs, which is just huge. We saw farms being rejuvenated. So the very brief history of Burundian coffee that I sketched there, the colonial crop, the state-controlled crop, and now this development darling. During the time when it was state-controlled, farmers, it was really just a crop for the state, for urban elites. There's just a lot of peasant oppression, and so farmers really didn't see why they should invest in their coffee fields. And then the fourth one was just trust as a platform for innovation, which So this Coffee Scout program continues now. I finished my PhD. The Coffee Scout program is continuing. There's now 26 Coffee Scouts. We've grown, like, I did an exercise where I said, okay, I wanted to create 10 jobs, and I counted up the other jobs, the jobs that have been created since my PhD. We're now at 45. Coffee Scouts, we've had another team to sort of integrate the quality team and the Coffee Scout team, so that it keeps growing because we have trust as a platform for innovation. Now, all of this, never imagined when I started this PhD journey in 2012. Like, this would be a lie to say that, hey, I wrote this in my research proposal. I didn't even know what question to ask before entering the social context. And I think it's really important, and in this chapter I really just try to show that none of this could have been predicted or planned. I can't take any credit for saying, oh yeah, I knew that if I did this would happen. What I did know is that I had to be committed to making the road as I walked it, and that what was coming out of context, I needed to, and this is the squeezing bit, you need to make decisions about what to incorporate and what not to incorporate. And because I knew my why, which was, I wanted to be a value add and solve problems, I wanted to create jobs, and I really wanted to learn by doing, I made decisions based on my personal why. Right, the third, so I've talked about context, I've talked about problems, and now I want to talk about knowledge. Those of you who've read some of the documents from E.T. Howe would see how they nicely set out the 3 types of knowledge in TD research: systems knowledge, target knowledge, transformative knowledge. I knew I wanted to focus on the transformative knowledge section. And what happened, so now I'm in the writing up phase, whatever that is. The writing in phase is what some other researchers use, and I much prefer that. And I sort of had this challenge to incorporate these different worlds that I was working in and trying not to get squeezed. And really, I think what emerged in this process, which was, we're now at, the research question emerged in year 4. And what I saw, once I was reflecting and thinking about how this, okay, so let me explain this properly. So I had this very intense experience in Burundi. A lot of great things happened. Jobs were created, the company was growing, I was growing as a person. My supervisor phones me in South Africa and says, hey, how's it going with your literature review? I'm like, I'm kind of involved in a really dynamic startup right now, and he literally said, if you don't submit this by a certain date, you're going to have to pay back your scholarship. I was like, cool, I'll be on the next plane out. And so now I'm in this phase of needing to write out an incredibly, just an experience of a lifetime, basically. But I need to solve problem 2, which is I need to do a PhD. And I think I cannot even begin to describe the confusion that I went through, from a PhD being hands-on, working with farmers, up-country, in a rural area, to then sitting behind a desk, and a PhD being a TD PhD only being a cerebral exercise, and trying to fit it into chapters, and trying to explain myself to other people. The confusion that resulted from that, I was like, why did no one prepare me for this? Was the question I had. I was like, why am I now alone trying to do this? And I think the aloneness is not unique to TD research. Like, PhD researchers in all fields will tell you about the aloneness, but the confusion of trying to work within a methodology that is, from my perspective, like, okay, yes, there's a very well-established TD literature for Europeans, effectively, but TD research in an African context was just nothing. Yeah, so this process was difficult, confusing, but the end result of it came the research question, finally, after 4 years. And the research question was unpacking this tension between the standardization of sustainability and the realities of context. And once that emerged, I was like, wow, okay, everything makes sense now, in the sense that I can now talk with, I can now do line 3, as Walter said. I can now speak to a literature, speak to a context, and still fulfill the commitments that my institution needs. So I sort of written it up here. So the research question then became, as an individual transdisciplinary researcher, working in contexts of high levels of educational and social inequality and with political instability, how do you construct the research process? Which was interesting, because I thought this was a thesis about sustainable coffee. And so in year 4, I'm learning that actually my PhD is about methodology. The fact that, transformative knowledge was generated through the IPM Coffee Scout program, it was unexpected, it was great, but it wasn't even the focus of my PhD now. Whoa, so Walter said, talk about looking out for surprises. Hello, I was surprised. None of this would have worked if there was an institution and a supervisor behind me who could effectively protect me from academia. Walter touched on the fact that there's a diversity of TD and that they're now putting together this special thing, special journal book to do that. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that up front and pick which TD school you're positioning yourself in. And because even in what I would consider safe forms of TD, there's still a violent collision that's going to happen with the way in which you do research and the way in which an academic institution expects research to be designed. I can't state enough the importance of knowing what is your institution's understanding of TD and making that very clear up front, and talking about that, okay, this is what the literature is saying, how do you understand it, how is it practiced here, if this happens, will this be acceptable? These are questions I didn't know that I needed to ask up front, because when I was taught TD, I was just taught emergent transformation design, jump into a social context, figure out the research question later. It's only when a year into my literature review I said, oh, the rest of the world isn't doing TD like this. And when I try and talk to other people about what I'm doing, I sound like someone who's basically just a practitioner. Just this anecdotal person telling stories from Burundi, a country that no one even knows where to find on a map. So, my survival tips, and then we're going to get into some questions and discussion. I don't have so many survival tips as I do have 3 questions that I would like to leave with you for you to think through as you design your research proposals and progress in your PhD. I think the first question that I think you should constantly ask yourself are, what are the conflicts between your social context, what your social context is demanding of you, and what your academic institution is demanding of you? What are the conflicts in knowledge production that you observe? And constantly take note of those and just be very aware of them. Second question is, how do you relate to or contain information that you are producing or knowledge that you're producing that is well beyond the scope of your own disciplinary lens? And then the third question that is a survival tip is, how do I know that I can make sense to others? So that's something that I do actually have one specific tip there for that thing, is I think if it is possible, I would recommend you to join a TD, a group of researchers who are writing together, and to share more frequently. That's something I wish I'd done or had the opportunity to do, share more frequently excerpts from my writing, because I would have recognized sooner that actually the language in which I'm using needs to change in order to connect to different communities. So just those three questions again that are survival tips. What are the conflicts between what my social context demands as valid knowledge production and what my academic institution demands? 2, how do I relate to or contain information that is well beyond my own disciplinary lens? or lenses actually, in a group like this. And 3, how do I know and ensure that I'm making sense to others? All right, thank you.
Good. Well, we have quite some time for questions on any of the aspects brought forward now.
And I realized that I still haven't figured out how I make sense to other people. So I realized there was a bunch of stuff in there that probably didn't make any sense to you. So please do ask questions if anything was unclear.
Any question, any type of question. Yeah, Anne?
How would you distinguish what you did from doing a development project with a startup? Because when you said you have to go back and do the literature review, I could have as well said, okay, no, because it was just a financial issue. It had to go back, right? Or did you then also say, oh right, I actually wanted to do that PhD? Like, what was that?
So are you asking me if at one point I wanted to give up the PhD?
No.
No.
What is the... Do you think it would also be possible to do something similar, not coming from an academic perspective, but actually working as an NGO, so to say, having to start practically what you had?
That's a really great question. I'm not sure because, but you said like as an NGO, because I think what is really important, what I did my best in my thesis to sort of illuminate is like the pressure of having to actually make it as a business. Brought something else added to you, and like what I've seen in the literature and especially in the implementation of UTZ certification and fair trade certification in Burundi is there's too many safety nets. It's, produces the entire certification process is paid for. Okay, here's there's a master's thesis done on fair trade certification in Burundi, the first cooperative that got certified. Belgian Development Fund pays for a bunch of stuff. Nowhere in the training and the certification process was this coffee cooperative told, hey, at some point you're going to have to actually sell this coffee. They really believe that if they just got the stamp, they would get market access. And I'm a very bad academic in the sense that I haven't published nearly enough of what I wrote in my PhD, but the one thing that I have published so far with Walter tries to unpack this, the fact that coffee is a luxury good. No one actually needs this. And we could all get by with very average quality coffee from Vietnam and Brazil. No one needs to care about a very low income country like Burundi that is trying to make it in the market. So with that pressure, how do you sell? So I don't think I could have done this if I wasn't within the squeeze of a startup. And then on the PhD side, I think the value that was brought there is just, I don't think I would have thought through I wouldn't have reflected as much if I wasn't doing a PhD. I would have just been like focusing on the hustle, which is kind of what I'm doing now. So now I'm finished the PhD and I'm just thinking through, okay, containers, gotta get containers out of the country, cash flow, this, that, and that deeper reflective state I wouldn't have had if I wasn't doing a PhD. Okay.
Actually, this question is kind of following up on this. How did, very concrete, how did the research help you with doing all this?
Sure.
What were the key findings of the research that really blew your mind?
Yeah. There were a couple. I think I'll start from the very personal. As working as a foreigner in Burundi, so anyone who's traveled to East Africa will know that if you're foreign, you get called Mzungu, which just means white person. You're out there, which is funny because I'm not white, and I am from Africa. And I think the research findings there were that reflecting on positionality, and most foreigners coming to Burundi are there for, maybe they work with an embassy, so they're there for 2 years, or a development project. The short-term thinking. So it made me, because I was doing research in this way, and because I had to justify myself to academically, I thought a lot about positionality and how that impacts on development projects and design, I realized actually, wow, if you don't, being a foreigner in this sort of context makes you feel you are more tempted to design short-term projects because you need to report to somebody else and to say, I've done my work. So that was the first. I hope that's clear. It's a fuzzy one, but it's a really important one because there are so many consultants who fly in and out of Burundi and just do these short-term projects and the reflection on what it means to create longer-term change processes as a foreigner was really important. And that has now led me to thinking through things of, so one of the things that I hope I sort of contribute to the literature is like, I followed this process as an individual researcher. I then had to leave this societal context to write this thing up. And what I didn't expect and what I think should be an expectation for people doing this sort of research is that you then take a back seat in your own research. So having reflected on positionality, I then was like, wow, societal actors are moving this forward without me. I left for 2 years to write up, and the program didn't fall apart. Like it continued, it grew. Like without me, I said, this is great, this is a success. And to the ability to step out of I'm the researcher making the connections and putting people together to, I'm now a facilitator, I'm in the back seat, I'm letting societal actors drive. Wouldn't have happened if I didn't have the pressure to reflect on my own positionality. The connections is the second one to other academic institutions. So that has been a huge advantage academically. So there's University of Michigan has been working in Burundi for several years now, and just having Stellenbosch University and Utrecht University behind my name allowed me to connect to other researchers, which helped my own work obviously, but has become really important in terms of how do I say this is moving towards a place where the knowledge that is produced about the Burundian coffee sector is no longer like, we're no longer just hoping that someone will fly in from the World Bank and do a report, and then that's not the knowledge. And I think, so I've always said this PhD is a small key to open big doors. So having a research mind and having to go through certain steps allowed me to speak in a language that got me legitimacy in another world, and now gets my colleagues and my team legitimacy in another world to say, okay, so people now email us and say, hey, what do you think about the crop this year? What do you think about these policy changes? So that's one of the impacts. And then the third one is which I haven't gone into detail here, but which I have obviously detailed in my PhD, is just the improvements in farm productivity, farmers' attitudes towards coffee, as we're now seeing farmers starting to talk entrepreneurially about their crop, whereas before this was just something that you just got rid of it, it gave you school fees, and now it's, wow, maybe we can start to see something that we see in Latin America, in Burundi. So yeah, did that answer?
Yeah.
I mean, as you know, the way that the fair trade certification works is you get a premium. You have to be a cooperative to get the premium on the price of the normal coffee. Just to get because
it's usually 20 cents above market price.
Yeah, it's about 20, and then if you're organic as well, you get an even more premium. But usually the way that they need to get together in the cooperative and decide the projects that will be used with that premium. And I was just wondering, in the case of Mile End, where
Long Miles, or
sorry?
Is it in the case of Long Miles?
Long Mile, sorry,
Yeah.
Long Mile, not Mile. Long Mile
No worries.
Roasters?
No, Long Miles Coffee Project.
Long Mile.
Yeah.
What were the development projects done?
Sure.
And were they cooperatives, like, or were they just independent farmers? So I was more looking at it through like a development
Sure.
perspective. Was it just generating greater income, or was it actually building schools, hospitals, roads, etc.?
Yeah,
Well,
it's a great question. So we do work with cooperatives as well as individual farmers, but most of our, I'd say 90% of our farmer base is individual farmers, because the story of cooperatives in Burundi is unfortunately not as wonderful and as it is in other parts of the world. Coffee cooperatives in Burundi are known for stealing money, for disappearing in the middle of the night. Part of that is also the way in which the privatization of the sector happens. So Rwanda and Burundi are often compared because of the way coffees taste and how they enter the market at the same time. In Rwanda, it was the sector is about a third cooperatives, but there, when the World Bank and USAID came in and gave money to privatize, they said one of the stipulations is that cooperatives must own washing stations, so they must own the sites of production. It never happened in Burundi, and training around that never happened. So you have just we first thought. We worked a lot with cooperatives in 2013 and thought a lot about how do we do co-ownership models of washing stations, and learned very quickly that we were coming in with an assumption that was just not valid in that context. We do on the premium thing, so one of the things we do is we said, hey, actually what the market is doing is so disconnected from the actual cost of production, which is one of my issues with fair trade too, is that they're still linking producers to the volatility of the sea market and not actually looking at true cost of production. So we work out true cost of production, and we have 3 processes of coffee: the fully washed, the natural, which is big in Brazil, but in Ethiopia we just dry the coffee in the skins, and then what's called honey process or pulp natural, as it is in Brazil. And for each of those we said, okay, this is how much it costs us to produce this, and made a price out of that. All of our coffee, so in Burundi there's a base price for coffee that's set by the government. We de facto always pay a higher base price, and we pay a transport bonus. So it used to be great. Farmers, we used to be able to collect coffee like collection points, and then the government said no, taking away collection points. Now some farmers are walking as far as 15 kilometers one way with, imagine, 40 kilos on your head, and we can't do anything as a washing station because we'll be fined if we set up a truck. So we said, hey, we'll pay farmers an extra bonus if you're walking in from a distance more than 5 k's. So higher base price, transport bonus. Then after export is finished, and after sort of once we've got net profit, give a premium back to farmers that they then decide how to do. So we're not doing any schools or I don't know, whatever the typical development projects are doing. We are only doing a cash bonus. But I think something that I would love to look into more, and if there's anyone with a master's student who'd love to do this thesis, is quantifying the social return and the social impact of the Coffee Scout program. So we speak about this a lot amongst our teams, like, what is actually the impact of us being in Burundi? And I think something that is taken for granted is the jobs aspect. The fact that we've created jobs that last, that these are not, unlike a lot of development projects linked to, a lot of skilled professionals in Burundi usually are jumping from project to project because there's 4 years and then they need to start reapplying again. And if you're lucky, and if you get in with these consultants, you always have a job. But if you're not lucky, and if you're living, in a very poor community, and you don't, you can read and you can write, but you have no access to this development aid industry that's happening in Bujumbura, what are the opportunities? So we count job creation as a huge impact for us. We're employing just over 600 seasonal laborers during the season, but the biggest thing that we're proud of is that, for the last 2 years, we've had a full-time staff of 46. That said, something that I personally would love to explore, and I wish I had someone to help me research this, but I don't have time to, is what are the benefits of a cash versus non-cash premium? Because there's significant research that shows that giving a cash premium doesn't necessarily mean investments back into the farm. And and there's some people playing around with this. There's a great organization called Sustainable Harvest. They're an importer based in Portland with offices throughout Central and South America and now in Rwanda. And something that I love what they do is, so they link their farmer training programs to the premiums. So a farmer needs to attend a certain number of trainings in the year and they get points. At the end of the season, you then have a card of choosing, okay, with my points I want to buy a mattress or a spray pump for insecticide or this various options. I think this is great. My only problem with that is that it's not linked to, if you produce, we're really focused on quality. We can only get a profit and premium back to farmers if we have a quality product. So how do you link training, the very sensory assessment of coffee, and then cash versus non-cash premiums? I think this is something that that's my next big project. Is like, which one actually makes the most impact, and if farmers say, they want a cash bonus only, like how does that affect what we're doing in terms of farmer training support, because we do want to connect the two. Does that answer some of your questions?
Yeah, definitely.
Anna?
What skills did you develop through your PhD that contributed to either your personal or professional growth that you now value the most, or that you would highlight?
I think the thing of explaining myself, which I'm still so self-aware that I've not done that very well in this presentation, but like TD really pushes you to what do you mean and what can this mean to other people. So that's a skill that was, I think, one of the biggest ones. The business side, I never was, I've never had any business skills. I had no dreams of being part of a startup, but I had to learn in order to help the societal actors solve their problems. I need to learn a lot more about business. And then I'm so grateful that I did have to, on the flip side, I'm so grateful that I did have to learn all the research side about what is the established literature on sustainable coffee. I'm so glad I had to go through that process, because now I can speak to, I work with, the people who buy coffee from us are really a bunch of hipsters, quite frankly, who run these little Scandinavian minimalist cafes and have no idea about the fact that the coffee that we're selling them is so, and how they present it in their cafe is so disconnected from the reality in rural Burundi. So I'm really grateful that the literature that I had to read gives me some things to talk to and speak to this other audience who, quite frankly, doesn't care about all of Burundi's problems unless they have a great cup of coffee that is scoring 87 plus. And so if I can get that product, then which is the business skills, then I can start having a conversation about the things that I'm actually really interested in, which is where do social justice and trade intersect. So, yeah.
Here?
One is, did any, like, with the development agency, it's like, from the country from the people ever ask you if you want to replicate a program like that with them? And then the second question, why is it such good coffee?
Why is Burundi? So the first question is, did anyone in sort of a
Like,
governmental
what
position?
you did, like, yeah, from the government, or I don't know how.
Yeah, so that's
it.
interesting, because I actually, there's a very hostile, anti-competitive attitude towards private sector actors in the coffee sector. So we should have completed liberalization, like, where are we now, 2019, like 7 years ago. But on paper, 50% of the assets are either still owned or managed by the state. So the analogy I always use, like, in the private sector in coffee, the highest flower gets cut first. So we kind of keep low. I never introduced myself as a researcher when I was talking to people. I said, hey, I work for Long Miles Coffee. But again, in terms of ethics, like, I was never extracting information and then using it. I was just working in coffee. There's a whole other discussion about ethics that I know some people might want to have. So now what's interesting is that we had a colleague who worked for us and then decided to take another job with basically the marketing agency for Burundian coffee. And now they're coming to us and saying, hey, please could you share, like, whenever they go to trade shows, please could you share what we're doing, please could you share what you're doing. And I was actually just last night looking at some emails from my colleague, and she said, I'm not too sure if what should we give, what should we not, because it is, the reality of the context is that this is not Kenya or Uganda or Tanzania where innovation is supported. This is what is it? How do my development friends call it? It's not a fragile state, but it's, I don't know, there's all these words that the NGOs use for what a country like Burundi is. It basically can explode at any moment, even though there's relative peace at the moment. So that's always in the back of my mind, and I'm very happy when people want to come and look. Okay, here's a great example. This is something that we have been doing more of, is so that Intestia bug, the bug that causes the potato taste defect. Every year we run a summer camp where we train kids on how to catch this bug, and then we run a competition who can catch the most bugs. And we have school supplies as presents. This year was crazy. We caught over 32 million bugs, I think 4,000 kids. It exploded so much that we said, okay, my one colleague was like, I think we should tell the government about what we're doing and invite some of them so that maybe they can give a speech. So we made a big event. And that was unexpected because the government official got up and said, "This is amazing. Every washing station in the country should be doing this. Please come and teach other washing stations." So that I like doing because it's, we just invited you to do a speech because that's sort of cultural in Burundi. Someone comes, they give a speech, and then it was their initiative. But like if someone actively approaches me to, hey, how can we replicate your model? I'm a bit hesitant. Why is Burundi coffee so great? A couple of reasons: altitude and climate. The most coffee regions in Burundi are from 1,700 meters to 2,200. Perfect for Arabica. Super moderate cool climate throughout the year. Lots of rain. Okay, climate change now is really messing this up a bit. Like longer rainy seasons, it's really messing it up. And the third one is a really good variety of coffee. So an heirloom Arabica varietal that was planted there back in the days, and it's a really highly sought after variety of coffee.
Good. I think last question, Gaston.
Thank you for your presentation. I was curious about the process of co-creating knowledge with stakeholders, and also we talked last night about building trust, and so maybe your challenges in terms of co-creating transformative knowledge in your case.
Yeah, so I think that process looked like, okay, so first I knew I had to come up with a research question that I didn't know what to do. So I just spent a couple of months just trying to figure out what is actually going on in terms of coffee production. So that looked like listening to farmers in formal groups, asking farmers, can I follow you for a day, sleep over at your house, see how your life is going, all of this. Then I started talking to buyers, and I meant traveling abroad, listening, what are you saying about this? Oh, you talk about this product in a very different way to how it's been spoken about in Burundi. And then the company. So listening to what did Long Miles need in order to be a successful coffee producer. And so listening to all these inputs, and then I came up with, okay, coffee quality, the material quality attributes of the coffee is this boundary object around which we can start to build knowledge. Then I perchance encountered this person in Rwanda who had this IPM program. And then, okay, starting to build that up here in Burundi, and I said, okay, how do we get farmers to connect to material quality? We use the bug. One bug, it was a simple message. One bug equals 40% yield loss, which was that was something that came from scientific literature. So we just started, running campaigns in that.